Robert Redfield he was the head of the CDC during COVID. And he quit, like he was basically forced out, but he's been telegraphing that he's got some real questions about Fauci and the lies that have been shoved down our throats for a while. So yesterday he was called before the House committee and laid it bare. And it was a thing of beauty. And of course, the mainstream won't play most of this. So we're going to go through a couple of the quotes because they're really interesting. Here he is first talking about how he made clear early on, it was clear to him this was a lab leak. It wasn't natural origin. And you know what? The mean girls suddenly pushed him out of all the discussions. Here it is, SOT 1.
In early to mid-January, I did have multiple calls with Fauci, Farrar, and Tedros about how important I thought it was that science get engaged in aggressively pursuing both hypotheses. I also expressed, as a clinical virologist, that I felt it was not scientifically plausible that this virus went from a bat to humans.
Why do you think you were excluded from those calls?
Because I was told to me that they wanted a single narrative and that I obviously had a different point of view. Science has debate, and they squashed any debate.
It's amazing. It's just a reminder to the audience. They were telling us and continued to tell us, Fauci and his virologist henchman, who he strong-armed into saying couldn't have been a lab leak, that they went into it totally open-minded. When they wrote that Nature article in February 2020, everyone was just an open-minded search, Stephen, for the truth. They didn't have their thumb on the scale for natural origin at all. And there you have the head of the CDC saying he was excluded from the conference calls, from the discussions, the head of the CDC, because he said, I think this is a lab leak.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. First off, who could have thought that Fauci might not necessarily be on the up and up? This is a guy who said that children could catch AIDS, right? Airborne from their parents if they lived in the same house. We've run that, and actually run that reference quite a few times on the show. How is this guy so wrong when he's the highest paid, or he was, I should say, unelected official in government? He got nearly everything wrong on AIDS. Here's the deal. We were suspended for talking about the Wuhan lab leak, by the way. And we also had some exclusive information on that with some people who spoke off the record. So we were suspended from YouTube. And this all brings us back to that same point, right? The big tech oligarchy that exists. Remember, you could not say, hey, there could potentially be some complications with the vaccine for people or myocarditis. You couldn't say we were once suspended. You can say this now, by the way. So I know your people might have their finger on the button as far as YouTube. You can say it now. We were also suspended for... Yeah, well, we have a no crap button, and basically it's just white noise at this point. But we also were suspended because Gerald, the nicest guy in the world on my show, who's in there in second chair all the time, we brought up the CDC numbers on the fact that far more young children are killed by the flu every year than COVID total. Now, here's the thing. Scientifically, that's interesting. We never said COVID was a hoax. We never said it wasn't deadly. We said, isn't it interesting? There must be something with the immune response that is conducive towards at least young people being able to fight it off more effectively. It kills old people at a much higher rate. And for some reason, young people, particularly infants, are far less susceptible. We'd love to follow that science. I'll give you an example. When Stephen Hawking went out and said there is no God, he's the most respected scientist, right, as far as physicists out there. He was, right, with his tenure. Well, he's a lot of things, but he's no scientist. That's not a scientific statement to say that there is no God. The problem is not that these people are unscientific. The problem isn't that Fauci is Fauci. We know exactly who he is. The problem is when YouTube, Facebook, and those who used to head up Twitter, you really have three companies who control 95+% of the information. You can toss Amazon and Apple in there. When they all get together and say, you can't talk about the lab leak. And then the real problem is when you have conservatives, when you have people on the right saying, okay, we'll avoid talking about that because we want to be in your good graces. That's why we were forced to go off and work with Rumble and work with at louderwithcreditor.com/Mugler, because we were running up against this all the time. Megyn, I'm talking 3, 4, 5 suspensions.
I look
One
back,
of them was having Carrie Lake on.
I know, which we did, and whatever. I look back at the reasons you got suspended. I'm like, what? How? Like, it's been absurd what's happened to you, and you needed to find a new platform. I get it. Wait, let's get to soundbite number 2 because this is equally good. So Fauci, yes, you use the word lie. Yes. So Fauci goes before Rand Paul, before Congress, before the U.S. Senate, before the House Republicans took over in the other chamber. And Rand Paul has been the best person on this. I mean, he's amazing to watch him try to cross-examine Fauci or anybody else on this because he's a doctor. He knows what he's talking about. And Fauci repeatedly told him, we didn't do gain-of-function research. We never did that. We know it's not true. The CDC and the NIH has now admitted it. Okay, it's not a matter of Megyn Kelly's opinion. They've admitted that they were doing gain-of-function research through this Wuhan lab. So here's Redfield, former CDC director, on Fauci and whether he's a liar. Saw it too.
Do you think that Dr. Fauci used this paper to hide the gain-of-function research created this virus?
I can't talk about Fauci's motivation.
Do you think that the paper does hide the truth?
I think it's an inaccurate paper that basically was part of a narrative that they were creating. Remember, this pandemic did not start in January at the seafood market. We now know there was infections all the way back into September. This was a narrative that was decided that they were going to say this came from the wet market, and they were going to do everything they could to support it, to negate any discussion about the possibility that this came from a laboratory.
Do you think that Dr. Fauci intentionally lied under oath to Senator Paul when he vehemently denied NIH's funding of gain-of-function research?
I think there's no doubt that NIH was funding gain-of-function research.
Is it likely that American tax dollars funded the gain-of-function research that created this virus?
I think it did, not only from NIH, but from the State Department, USAID, and from DOD.
Amazing. It's just, I'm sorry, it's gratifying to hear a guy in his position actually say it. Mudwater is a coffee alternative with 4 adaptogenic mushrooms and Ayurvedic herbs. With only a fraction of caffeine as a cup of coffee, you get energy without the jitters or the crash that comes from coffee. Each ingredient was added for a purpose. Cacao and chai for mood. Doesn't cacao always stop you in your tracks? I hate, like, you don't often see it written, but cacao and chai for mood and just a hint of caffeine, just a hint. Lion's mane to support focus. I should have had that before I read this ad. Cinnamon for antioxidants and much, much more. Mud is Whole30 approved, 100% USDA organic, non-GMO, gluten-free, vegan, and kosher certified. Mudwater donates monthly to the Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics, as Mudwater believes the country is in a mental health epidemic and sees psychedelics as useful tools for individuals with depression, PTSD, anxiety, and other mental health problems. We did a great episode on that. You should check it out. Mud is not wrong. Go to mudwater.com/Megyn, and that is spelled MUDWTR.com/MEGYN. Okay? MUDWTR.com/Megyn to support the show and use that code MEGYNMUD, MEGYNMUD, for 15% off. MUDWTR.com/Megyn. Use the code MEGYNMUD. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.